Hello and welcome. I'm Peter Valdaya, Director of Curatorial Affairs for the Huntsville Museum of Art, and I'm here today with my colleague, David Reyes, Curator of Exhibitions and Collections for the museum. We're very pleased to be here today to host this virtual talk and studio visit in connection with Black History Month, and also the exhibition Encounters Dean Mitchell, which is currently on view at the museum through March 20th, 2022. I want to thank you all for joining us. Our guest today is featured artist Dean Mitchell. Dean is joining us from his studio in Tampa, Florida. His current exhibition at the museum surveys the past 35 years of his studio practice through an astonishing array of portraits, landscapes, and still lives that focus on themes of isolation and endurance. Before we begin, I want to thank the HMA Black History Month Committee for sponsoring this program. I also want to thank the many sponsors of the exhibition, which you can find on the museum's website. I also want to remind everyone that during the course of this program, you can use the Q&A button on the screen to type any questions as we proceed, since we'll want to try to get to some of those at the end of the program. And now I'll hand the proceedings over to David Reyes, who will introduce today's artist, Dean Mitchell. David?
Thank you, Peter, and good afternoon, everyone. We are pleased to have with us today Dean Mitchell. Dean Mitchell is a nationally renowned artist from Tampa, Florida. Mitchell's production encompasses portraits, landscapes, and still lifes in the time-honored realist tradition. In addition to his primary medium of watercolor, he is accomplished in acrylic, oil, and pastel. Mitchell is known for his superb craftsmanship, the emotional depth of his work, and his skilled sense of formal compositional design. Dean Mitchell was born in 1957 in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and reared in the small town of Quincy in the Florida Panhandle. He received his BFA in 1980 and later his MFA from the Columbus College of Art and Design in Columbus, Ohio. Upon graduation, Mitchell moved to Kansas City to work as an illustrator at Hallmark Cards. He remained at Hallmark for the next 3 years, after which he decided to pursue painting as a full-time career. Widely exhibited both nationally and internationally, Mitchell has received more than 500 awards, including first prize at the T.H. Saunders International Artists in Watercolor Competition in London, England, the American Watercolor Society's Gold Medal, the Allied Artists of America's Gold Medal in Watercolor and Oil, and the Thomas Moran Award from the Salmagundi Club in New York, New York. Mitchell has been featured in numerous publications, including the New York Times, the Christian Science Monitor, the American Artist and Artist Magazine, Fine Art International, and Art News. His works can be found in public collections across the country, including the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C., the St. Louis Museum of Art, the Rockwell Museum in Corning, New York, the Nelson Atkins Museum of Art, the Kemper Museum of Contemporary Art, and the Huntsville Museum of Art, among many others. Please join me in welcoming from sunny Tampa, Florida, Dean Mitchell.
Hello, welcome everyone. What we're going to do is we're going to start off with process and what inspired me to do the work. So we will start there. This is a quick drawing, which is a lot of drawings. And then from the drawings, I work into a full painting. But this is my friend Rowena. She's at the latter stages of her life in this particular drawing. In fact, this was the last visit to my home, in which she was she was so frail. I picked her up from the car and carried her into my home. And this was when she was sitting in the chair. I just went and grabbed my sketchbook, and this was one of the quick sketches that I did of her. And usually with drawings, they really inform me about the moment in which I'm trying to capture. And when I was doing this drawing, I was sitting there thinking about my grandma Seeley, who died when I was very, very young. So I had a very early experience with death and people transforming to a different space in time. And so I've always been really sort of captivated by by death and life and birth and that kind of thing. And I think that just kind of, it actually has penetrated throughout all of my work. I think I'm a painter who's really interested in a very intimate space. And sometimes as a painter, you can capture that moment, and sometimes it's a little elusive for you. It's a little bit difficult, but it's just one of those things that I can tell you, there's nothing like watching someone slowly sort of as their life is sort of coming to a close. This is the finished work. If you look at her, her hand kind of bleeds off of the frame of reference. And usually when people are ill, you usually walk up to them. I usually sit there and you hold their hands and help them through this transition. And if you look at her, her eyes are not looking at you. She's looking slightly away. Her body language, she is still in somewhat full control of her spiritual sense of self. And this is what I was after. If you look at how I moved the black shapes around her, those were shapes that I added to kind of taste. It's very touching. There's sort of almost a slightly ghostly quality about her skin tones even. And I've kind of accented a little touch of reds in her lips to kind of give it a little bit more warmth to her. But if you've ever lost a loved one, I'm sure you can certainly relate to this. And I'm inviting you again, as her hand bleeds out the frame of reference, to walk in and touch and be a part of her space, her experience. Watercolor, by the way. This is an acrylic. I will be talking a little bit more about my process. This at one time was a watercolor, and I converted it to an acrylic. I felt that I wanted the work to have a little bit more weight to the drama of it. But in this particular work, this is Dr. T.J. Bryant. He's from Kansas City. He was a doctor. He worked, he helped a lot of people during his lifetime. Even when people who didn't have money, he would still take them in. But here he is stricken with Alzheimer's. His wife asked me to do a portrait of him. And I said, well, you know, Rose, I don't really do commission work. And she told me about what he was grappling with. And so I did an entire series on him. And it's so funny, when Rose came over to look at the work, I had all these drawings and sketches and paintings. And she said, oh, I just wanted one painting. And I said, Rose, let me share this with the world, because this is a human condition. And that's what I'm trying to capture in this work. I want people to see the humanist man life. We're on the planet. And so I want people to look beyond the skin color of my images. I want them to feel the full humanity of what I'm trying to say with the work. So this is T.J. Bryant.
So Dean, was this particular image done from a drawing?
The painting itself is titled Why Me? And it was because his wife shared the story with me. When he found out that he had Alzheimer's, he said, why me? So the painting is actually titled Why Me? And I just sold it to a doctor who's a collector of mine. He owns about 70 of my works. And usually paintings like this, people don't want them because they're disturbing. But that's what works of art are supposed to do. They're not supposed to always make you feel comfortable. They're supposed to make you feel the fleetingness of life and the frailness of it. That's what my work is all about, and how time can erode any of us. And this is just something that he happened to be stricken with. No one knows how we're going to leave this world. But I just wanted people to see the humanity in this work. This is a watercolor. This is my friend Bob Ragland. He's from Denver. I met Bob years ago. I was invited to a show in Denver, and he called me up over the phone. He said, "You don't know who I am. I'm Bob Ragland. I'm an artist." American to be invited to the show. And we became very, very good friends over the years. I would refer to him as my Art Yoda, because when I was always down, he would always pick me up and call me up. And he informed me about a lot of the struggles of African-American artists and so forth. And Bob was a very, very well-read man. If you look at his studio, there's all these paintings. I wanted to capture him in his space. He's in deep the gesture. I'm a really body language and how people use space and how it intrigues you. And if you look at him, he's really in deep thought. And then that doorway takes you into another dimension. There's sort of a window there on the back end of that kind of pulls you out of his space into another, it has a mystery to it. There's a mystery to it. And it's watercolor and all those instruments on his table. It's a very chiseling abstraction. You don't really, you can recognize some of the images, but I'm really not even concerned about capturing every detail. Sometimes I just abstract the forms, and that makes it more interesting. It makes it more lyrical. And I muted a lot of the images behind him because I wanted him to be the main focus in the work. This is titled Tobacco Barn Wealth. It's titled Tobacco Wealth in the Weeds. I grew up working in tobacco, and I did a lot of images and drawings and sketches of tobacco barns. And I did so many of them. I said I was never going to do any more barns. I'd done so many of them. But then when I returned home to Florida, I moved to Tampa, and I would go back home, I would see these barns, and I had a different sensibility of them. They were at one point majestic. People built the enormous wealth off of these structures and paid people very little. A lot of money for these structures, but yeah, these are all becoming. It's kind of, it has a ghostly quality to it, but it's haunting. And tobacco, I have a long history with tobacco. I had an uncle who died of lung cancer who smoked. And we worked in the open fields. A lot of people were poor. They had no other jobs to work on. And people became very wealthy. So I wanted it to have a haunting, ghostly quality. And seeing the trees kind of consume this structure was kind of very haunting and interesting to me. It has an interesting airy quality to it as well. It's a watercolor too, by the way. This is out in Arizona. This is on the Pima Maricopa Reservation. Over the years, I've been invited to a lot of shows out west, Preta West, Masters of the American West, the Idle Joys, these different shows out west. And when I first got invited to them, I said, well, I'm not really a Western artist when I first got invited to these. But as I traveled out west, I became very, very interested in the space to depict the West as a romantic space. I wanted to find things that were unusual, things that people would normally perceive at the West as the West, although they were in the West. And this is certainly one of those scenes. This tree kind of bursting through the earth with this kind of greenery kind of hovering over it. Was very fascinating to me that something could survive in such a dry climate and it thrusted these wonderful shadows, and it was just an interesting form to me. And these linear trees, and almost like arms coming out of the earth or something. And in the far background is a presence of man. There's some dumpsters back there that were filled with a lot of trash and so forth. But it was just a very, very interesting thing, and people would not associate this with the West, but it is part of the West. So again, trying to find an unusual space, a space of isolation in which people wouldn't really look at it. It's just, I think it's an interesting form. It's just very, very interesting. Nature and has a certain beauty and power to it that I particularly watercolor. Uh, one of my favorite cities, New Orleans. This is the Napoleon House in New Orleans. I had a gallery that handled my work there for a number of years, but my first trip to New Orleans was probably in the '80s. I did something for a commercial job for Anheuser-Busch, and we unveiled it at the New Orleans World's Fair there. And I fell in love with the space. I had no idea that down the road that a gallery would wind up representing my work there. New Orleans, I just love that place, that space. There's just so much history there. It's such richness there, and the fact that it's a city below sea level and vulnerable. The fact that there were Black slaves who built the railings for their balconies. It's just a rich place for jazz, and it's rich in history. And as I'm walking through the French Quarter in those areas, I could see all these abstract shapes and the dramatic lighting. And a lot of times I will push the value to add more drama to my work. I think that's, as an artist, I have that license to do so. But if you look at the way the shadows kind of pull you into the space and lock you into the space, it's a very dramatic work. It captures the textural quality of the buildings. It has this presence of light in it. It's very haunting and interesting, and it's again, I think it has a mystery to it. There's these windows and these doorways, and there's space in which you can travel into the forms itself. It's a building that you feel like you can walk into the space and be a part of it. So it's a very intimate space again. This is saturation. I grew up in Florida, so I had a gallery in Panama City, Florida. It was one of the first galleries that represented my work when I was about 18 or 19 years old. And the gentleman who owned it would often take me out on his boat, and I would do these drawings and sketches of cypress trees. And cypress trees are just, oh my God, they're magnificent. It's just so interesting how nature gives us so much beauty. And if you look at it, if you really look at this painting, it has a musical quality to it. It feels like it's an orchestra or something with all these linear forms, and it's very musical. And then there's a lot of textural quality to it. I like the usual growth of the trees and the texture, and again, it is in the space. It's a watercolor. This was a tough painting to do in watercolor, and I tend to like things that are challenging to me. And again, I try to look for something unusual, because I think as an artist, how we see something is our signature too. It's not just the technique and the application of the work or the style of the work. It is also what we're drawn to and why we're drawn to it, and trying to capture that intimacy, because no one's gonna always see the world exactly the way you see it, but you can show the world to people through your eyes. So it has a certain intimacy to it that I really like. Very challenging work to do in watercolor, I can tell you that right now. Very challenging. This is in New York. This is an urban city in New York. It could be in any urban city, actually. There's nothing there that says it's New York. But if you look at it, again, it's a very intimate a figure in isolation. So, and I've always done, most of my work, for some reason, has always just focused mainly on a single figure. I'm not sure exactly where that comes from. It just feels good to me to do figures in isolation that way. I don't know if it's, again, the intimacy. I don't know, but I do. I kind of enjoyed this work, because here she's standing on the corner there, patiently waiting perhaps to cross the street. The movement, if you look at the movements, they're very severe movements. She's standing upright, the pole is going upright, the little trash can to the right is going upright, and then you have these other strong horizontal lines. There's a lot of movement in it. There's some abstract point behind it that kind of represent, it could be a doorway or a store or something. But again, not necessarily trying to capture a literal space itself, but also trying to give it my own signature, kind of abstract, very muted tonal work. But I think it captures a moment. I think it captures a moment in the city. This is a painting I did in acrylic. It's titled Industrial Giant. It's really about erosion, really about these massive structures that sometimes you ever go. When I traveled out west and then I traveled to smaller towns, you see these huge factories at one time where people actually worked, and they relied upon these spaces for their livelihood. And I saw so many of these vacant spaces throughout my travel that I wanted to start doing a portrait, sort of a portrait series of these structures that were being left behind, and sort of, you know, they have a haunting quality to them. But again, it's almost like a portrait. You see the kind of rustic part of the building, sort of, again, time having its effect on what, and then these lineages, they give you a different kind of lyrical sense of the building itself. Because whenever I'm composing something, I'm constantly looking at how I'm placing something in the space, because it's simplistic. The space around it has to be as interesting as the form that you're looking at. So I'm constantly reassessing when I'm doing something. And sometimes I eliminate things that were there and add things that weren't there to make it more interesting. And I feel I have that license as an artist to do that. So I'm really fascinated to keep doing an entire series on this. And I'm thrilled too that the Huntsville Museum has added this to their collection. Thank you all for doing that.
Yes, Dean, we love this piece. And for me, it really shows your ability to master a composition and really to see things abstractly. And I think that's a real important point. You know, I think people, they always consider you a realist, and there is so much abstract sensibility in your work. It really dominates a lot of your work, even work that looks very realistic. But I just think this is a great example of your mastery of line, of shape, of color, of orchestration, of forms on a canvas. So we're very happy to have it in our collection.
Thank you. This is also an acrylic. This is, again, a very intimate space. It has a voyeur quality to it, like there's someone standing there looking through a window at the space. And whenever I've gone to New York or Chicago, any urban area, I'm always very, very fascinated with how many people actually live in a building. So you see all these windows, but windows, but windows, but windows. It's just really fascinating to me. But trying to capture, again, I feel like it is somewhat of a portrait, but it's a portrait of windows, a portrait of a space. It does, I know the New York Times compared me to Vermeer, the artist Vermeer, and I can see some of that sort of window effect and that sort of intimacy of Vermeer in my work. I hadn't really thought about that. And then someone else in Kansas City also compared me to Vermeer, which I thought was very interesting. But again, there's that interesting, the sense of light, the way the forms kind of flow into one another. There's a lot of soft edges and hard edges. So you get this push and pull, the fluctuation of space, the way I've muted the tones, the repetition of the windows in the back there, and then this sort of interesting, sort of rustic pipe line kind of ripping across those forms. This is, I think does a lot of things. It's busy yet it's not busy, and it's intimate at the same time. So it was interesting, different way of looking at the city, as opposed to trying to capture the entire city. I'm trying to capture, again, a more intimate space in the city that most people would pass by and not probably even look through a window, even look at it. So. It's an acrylic, by the way. This is my cousin Carolyn. Carl and I grew up together. My grandmother raised us. And, Carla was, she's like my sister, really. And she would pose for me, whatever I wanted her to pose for me. But again, I wanted to celebrate her, And when I was at the Columbus College of Art and Design, I did notice that when I first got there was no paintings of African Americans in the museums. And I struggled with trying to learn how to use flesh tones. And all the things that are going on now in the art world, where they have all these workshops and different things. I didn't have that. Believe it or not, I really learned how to paint out of a book by reading and experimenting on my own and going to museums. Yes, I did go to art school, but the teachers rarely even demonstrated. They do a lot more demonstrating now. So I'm basically, in a lot of ways, very self-taught. But I was really trying to capture, her beauty and her elegance and her, the grace and the way she looks out at you, and she has this stylish black hat on and this nice jewelry that drapes around her neck. It's very elegant work, and I've always wanted to paint African Americans with a certain dignity and pride and love and passion for them. I want people to see the beauty of our different skin tones, and she has these wonderful, luscious lips, and you could see that she's a beautiful woman. I want to portray her strong. This is titled, you can go to the next slide. This is titled Hidden. Again, I grew up in a rural area in Quincy, Florida, and I've always been, we used to go outside when I was young. We used to draw a lot with fountain pens or ink pens because we weren't allowed, we couldn't erase, so we couldn't. But anyway, some of these buildings are in Greensboro, Florida. But if you look at the work itself, it's quite abstract. You can recognize the building. If you look at the trees, I study a lot of different kinds of art. And in this particular painting, I laid the work on the floor and dropped paint and slashed the paint. Very much like work. Reason you feel the foliage of the tree is because of the relationship that you're having with. There's realism and there's abstraction, and the reason I like watercolor is because I can be free with it and experiment, and I don't know sometimes what the paint will do exactly. I kind of like that unpredictability of it, and then there's a lot of control and unpredictability. This is why I love this medium. I hope museums will show more watercolors. Because it's a beautiful medium that I think is underappreciated. I don't see very many watercolors being displayed in museums. I like to be a voice in changing that, and also bridging that gap between realism and abstraction, and romanticism and abstraction. So anyway, again, it does have a mystery. It doesn't show you the complete building. It leaves something for the imagination for you to fill in. And then the white of the building there is all the white of the paper. There's no paint there. So that's a very controlled area, control, freedom, abstraction, linearism with the trees. It's a lot of things in this work. This is actually this is a still life. This actually came about, when the pandemic hit. I was looking for something more tranquil to do, and I started experimenting. This is actually acrylic, and it's painted on top of cheesecloth that I adhered to one of my watercolor boards. It has a very interesting textural quality to it, but it's really about meditation and trying to relax. It was really just something for me personally. I was just going through a lot with my family, with my children being isolated, and trying to find a moment of silence. I think it's called Peace and Silence in the Moment is the title of it. It has a kind of a Buddhist quality to it, with the way the statue is sort of sitting there and sort of erect and very, again, a single object again. And sort of there's this abstract, this Black abstract form, again, creating another space, another place in which you can move about. I tend to do that a lot in some of my work. I tend to want a space I can escape from back into it gets some kind of mystery, I think it does. It's very, very dramatic piece. It's an acrylic. I do like experimenting and trying different things. And this is titled Trinity. It was shown at Oklahoma City at Prida West. And it's a Civil War soldier. He has the slave apparatus thing around his neck, was used to keep the slave from running away. It was also used for slaves who often ran away. They would put these braces around their neck. And here I wanted to show the sacrifice of Black men in the Civil War. And even though they sacrificed their lives, there was no guarantee that they would be free. And as a kid, I did go to church a lot, and the Trinity thing has somewhat of a religious undertone to it. The Father, Son, the Holy Spirit. I felt like slavery is not a Black thing. It is a human thing. It is an inhumane thing. And we need to show it for what it is, and we need to talk about it. I think that is one of the most brutal things. I just cannot imagine being a slave. I don't know how these men were able to fight and hold their dignity. If you look at him, he's looking toward the future, maybe not for himself, but maybe for the future of this country. And so it has a certain power to it. There is something about, I do not understand how we as human beings can treat another human being this way because they're Black. I don't understand that. I know I grew up in the segregated South. I still to this day do not understand why people don't like each other because of their skin tones, their hair texture. That has always been a puzzling thing to me. I remember my grandmother sharing a story with me about light-complected Negroes and like dark-complected Negroes. This was some of the most ridiculous things I'd ever heard as a young boy growing up. And I thought, if I could do anything in this country, it would be to help heal those wounds and to let people see each other as full human beings. And this painting, it just says a lot to me. And I guess after the George Floyd moment, I don't know, I wanted to figure out a way to tap into our history, to tap into our humanity and say, we need to stop, we need to look, and we need to examine ourselves. We need to examine our own souls and how we move through this planet, because I'm telling you, no one lives forever, no one. Believe me, when you're on your deathbed, you will think about all the things that you did. You will think about them.
You lose Dean?
That was very well said. I do think this image is a key recent image of Dean's. I think his work is moving away a little bit. Oh, sorry, Dean. I was just, you cut out for a second, and I was just telling the audience that I think this is a key image, and I do see your recent work changing somewhat. It's becoming, this acrylic work is becoming kind of a little bit more message laden, a little starker, and I do think that it reflects the moment. So kudos to you. I do think this is the last piece in the series. And I think at this point, we're going to move on to the studio visit portion of and did we lose Dean? I hope not. Oh, there he is. Okay. I thought we lost you, Dean.
You there? I'm trying to turn it over to my studio, but
there we go.
There we are. Okay.
Okay.
So while Dean's making his little transition, he's going to tell us a little bit about what he's working on right now in his studio, and then we'll take some of the questions and deliver them to Dean.
So Dean, why don't you tell us,
Yes.
a little bit about your studio and what you've got going on behind you?
Well, okay, this is the area I usually occupy, which is, the studio is about 2,000 square feet. It has real high ceilings and all that kind of stuff, and great lighting and things. And to be frank with everybody, I am an artist who, I don't work on one or two things at a time. I probably have about 30 or 40 paintings going. That's the way I've always worked. And there's some things behind me, like this is an acrylic, this is the watercolor. I have some sketches here. I tend to run into problems whenever I'm working on something. I can't solve it, I put it away. And then there's sometimes I work on things that don't work out at all, and I just over them and I start over. I'm an avid believer in recycling everything. And because I was in some ways self-taught, I don't really have a formula to how I work. I'm pretty brutal on brushes. I will tell people that, particularly watercolor brushes. I'm very brutal on watercolor brushes. But I am, again, I'm working on a series of portraits, landscapes, and I'm also kind of starting to do some collage work. I don't have any of those out here, but I'm doing some cut paper things. I'm just an artist who wants to experiment. And my work, if you look at it over the years, if people have followed my work over the years, they will see an evolution of my work. It's a subtle shift. Like, for example, my watercolors initially were quite tight and very realistic in some ways. Now they're becoming more freer, a little bit more abstract. And I think that happens as you mature. You don't need as much information to get your point across with what you're saying about space. So you let go of some of the meticulousness. But then sometimes I go back to it for whatever reason. I kind of enjoy the back and forth thing because I tend to sometimes marry the two. And I look at a lot of different types of art that creeps up into my process. And I, like I said, I never took workshops. I would go to museums and I would try to figure out how they did something. And I've never been the kind of artist who wanted to really watch anybody paint. Because I don't know, I have mixed feelings about watching other people paint. Watch me paint, they're more confused sometimes than before because I don't have a formula. So I don't have a set way I work. And my subject matter that I choose is very intuitive. It's for the moment. It's in the moment. Sometimes someone introduces me, someone I'm pulled into their personality. I think if I can get them to sit for me or pose for me, then great. And then other times it's through observation, it's through the news, something that stimulates me. If I'm traveling, I might see something that I think is interesting. There's all kinds of ways that an artist works, but go ahead.
So actually,
I work very intuitively. I work very intuitively. There's no formula to how I work. There's some artists I know that and I don't do a lot of what they call like study roughs and stuff. I know you mentioned that I worked for Hallmark Cards as an illustrator for a few years. I got let go on that job. That was one of the most troubling things that I had with being an illustrator was that they wanted these color roughs and color this, and they wanted you to show them exactly what you were going to do. And that's what I didn't like about illustration. I admired the discipline of it, but I did not like the calculated formula process of it. Because when I was at Hallmark, they said, where's your layout, or where's your this, or where's your that? I just go straight to the board. No, we need to see a layout. We need to see this. It's just, I didn't like that kind of control. And so I realized I wanted to pursue fine art. I have total control over how I approach a work. And then sometimes you run into issues with galleries. Well, give us this, give us that. I got to do what I want. When I'm, I don't want to get me wrong, because I want people to by what I do because it's how I support my family, make my living, and I love what I do. But it's for me, it's all about trying to capture something and capturing life and trying to capture a moment and trying to experience life through my eyes with paint or sculpting or whatever I'm doing. I don't want somebody dictating to me what I should do.
So
That's
Dean,
why
that
those two
actually leads me to a couple of questions that we have from the audience. You show that you have like done drawings, but do you also do like photo references? Like somebody is asking the question, how are you capturing that moment? That very specific moment. Do you do that through photo references? Do you do that through quick sketches, or do you just do that from memory?
It's usually a combination of both. Sometimes it's only sketches. Sometimes it's photo reference sketches. And if I use photo reference, 9 times out of 10, it's going to be a drawing, and then the photograph gets discarded, and the drawing becomes my main focus because then my imagination kind of takes over. And the abstract quality, this is why I like working from drawings, because it informs you differently. And so it becomes more intuitive, which is why I think in the initial part of working, I will put down a lot of drawing, usually a lot of drawing, particularly with watercolor. Now, the more mature I become as a painter, I can put down a few lines and sometimes no lines at all. And I like that freedom. But that freedom comes with years and years of experience. Being able to say more with less is much more difficult than entertaining the eye with a lot of detail. And so, again, I think drawing, I taught a life drawing class. That was one of the most valuable things to me. I took a lot of life drawing when I was in college. That became one of the most valuable tools for me as a painter. That drawing extension, the way I don't just use my hand, I use my full arm when I'm painting, when I'm slinging paint, even when I'm doing a watercolor. Sometimes it's a strong thrust. That's a certain kind of energy. So I'm trying to collect data, and I do that as well. But I think to bring your own sense of your own personality or something, you got to let some of that go. You have to let it go. Experiment either through color or through, because I've taught workshops and I've watched people use photo reference, and they're so busy looking at the photograph that they're not even. There's no experience in it. And I was like, where are you in this thing? I want to see some of you in this. Okay, so you can copy a photograph, but where are you in this moment? Where are you in this space?
Yeah, I think that's actually one of the most wonderful things about your work is that it has that combination of tightness and looseness in there, where you can see the mastery of the technique, but then there's also the confidence to let yourself experiment and let it evolve and become the artwork, become what it needs to become in the process.
Yes, I remember someone saying, "Boy, it must have took you a long time to do that." I said, "Why don't you get a little closer in?" And they got a little closer and they said, "Oh my God, it just runs and drips." I said, "Now back away from it." And it tightens up like that. I learned that from going to the museum and looking at John Singer Sargent and Rembrandt, and looking at how I get up on it, I go, "That's just a blood. What is that?" And then you back away and it just does that. Yes.
Yeah.
That's from going to museums and looking at works of art and backing away from it, getting closer in and backing away. And that's how I paint. I look at it, I back away, and you get closer, I back away again. That's how, but that's years and years of experience. Painting is hard for me. I don't know what people think. Painting is hard for me because I'm examining everything, but yet and still there's a certain freedom and intuitiveness that I feel more free than I've ever felt as I've matured as a painter. And in fact, when I make a mistake, I tend to like it because it didn't work out. I tend to like it. If it works out too quickly for me, I'm usually troubled because I'm not sure I'm growing. So I like that something doesn't work out. Sometimes I've had to gess over entire work, in watercolor or acrylic, and I would just gess over it. Guess what? I guess historians may go crazy with some of my work. They start X-raying some of it because there's layers of paintings underneath that did not work out. So so I'm not troubled by making mistakes. One of the things that I've noticed about people when I did do workshops years ago, they were so careful about making mistakes. I was like, this is how you learn. You learn by making mistakes. You let it go. Don't be so rigid and so. How can you express yourself if you're scared to death of what you're doing? How can you let anybody in that way? You can't let anybody in like that. So I want people to come in. So I want them to see the freedom of my hand, but I also want them to see the intimacy of it and the complexities of it and the tenderness of it and the complexities of life in it, if that makes any sense.
Mm-hmm. Well, Dean, this has been fantastic. We've got time for one more question. And actually, I think we've got one from Carla. How do you think young African-American artists experience working now versus the experience that you had coming up as a young Black artist? And what would you like to see change in the art world vis-a-vis that?
Oh my goodness, that is a loaded question. Yes, it is very different. The platform has changed. I grew up in the rural South. I didn't have any role models as artists. I had a mother who was the first out of my grandmother's 4 children to go to college. So a Black man cannot possibly make a living painting pictures. And then you go to the museum, and then there was nothing of any African American artist of color. In fact, I decided the way I decided to get known was to enter competition. It was the only way that I knew growing up poor that I had any kind of opportunity. And even the galleries at times didn't even want to handle my work, although I wound up lucky out getting galleries. But it was the fine art competition that put me before the art world that I didn't know that would actually work. But I had to try something, otherwise I wasn't going to be able to do this. There's much more opportunity now. There's much more discussion about race. I've been talking about the lack of African-American images for, ever since I was in college. I've tried to address those issues and got very little attention. In fact, when I was in Kansas City, sometimes people didn't want to hear it. So it's very, very different now. The conversation is very, very different. So there's a lot of complexities to getting known in the art world. Who endorses you? What kind of grants you get? It's a lot of layers of complexities. And I realized that I did not have a lot of those connections in the art world. So I had to look inside my toolbox and figure out, what do I have to build upon? I have my talent. I did go to school, and the fact that I have my work ethics, and I have my determination, and I had a dream. And so I pursued that. And did I get a lot of negative comments? I got negative comments on both ends of the fence based on the type of imagery I was doing. You paint white, you don't do, you're doing a landscape. Why aren't you doing Black art? What is that? I know I'm African American, but the bottom line of it is when people look at my work, I want them to feel themselves in it. Not just the color of the skin of the people that I'm painting. I want them to feel the humanness of it because we're not that different from one another. Although, again, as I have said earlier, I can't believe how we as a species, that we have not evolved spiritually enough to realize that we are not that different from one another. There's still so many wars and so many craziness with religious ideology. We're a very complex creature. But we're very much the same. We're not that different. We all want the same things. I'm trying to communicate that. Did I grow up with discrimination? Was it hard for me to get this far in the art world? You tag on right, it was. Was it hard for me to get a museum show? I'm very grateful to have a museum show. But my talent has given me a voice. I'm hoping that doors will continue to open for everyone who's out here trying to do something positive in this world and trying to better us as human beings and to make the world a better place to live in, and that we can appreciate each other as full human beings. That's what my work has always been about. I have definitely had my hardships, my pains, but I've also grown from those pains. Those pains inform
how I moved through the world, but I had such strong role models and such a strong grandmother and such a spiritually grounded grandmother that a lot of those things didn't matter to me. I've been in shows where people walk by my work and went by a thing, but it didn't bother me. The thing of it is that I felt that I was doing what I had to do and what I was put on the planet to do, and that was to paint and hopefully to help heal the wounds of racism in this country through my work and my efforts. That's all I can do.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you so much, Dean, for sharing that with us. I think
We're just about out of time, I believe. Dean, that was fantastic. I could listen to you talk all day. You're such an engaging person and an amazing artist. I want to thank everyone who signed up for this session today. And if you missed any portion of this program, you will be able to rewatch it on the museum's YouTube channel. That'll be running in a day or so. Also, if you are not in the Huntsville area and you're interested in Dean's work, we do have a catalog that we have published along with this exhibition with a great interview with Dean. And you can go to the museum's website. You can see the connection down at the bottom of the slide there. You can order that catalog. We'll mail it to you. Also want you to be aware that you can spend another engaging session with Dean at the museum in person. Dean will be in Huntsville on Thursday, March 10th from 6 to 8 p.m. We will have a lecture, a reception, and a catalog signing with Dean. And you can purchase tickets online for that event by, again, going to the museum's website at www.hsvmuseum.org. We hope to see you there. In the meantime, come and see Encounters Dean Mitchell at the Huntsville Museum of Art. It's a fantastic show, and it's on view now through Sunday, March 20th. Thanks again, Dean, and thank you all for joining us. Have a great rest of your day.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.